boys will like you more. You'll be so much more popular. You'll be so much more attractive. And I can't get his voice out of my head. So I said to her, is Ed a friend or a foe? She said, he's a friend. He cares about me. He wants me to be popular. I would like to be popular. I couldn't continue this conversation, so I asked for a break. If you watch the show, I used to have this mobile studio. I walked into the studio, speaking to the producers, and I said, how did we communicate to this young woman that Ed is a killer? He's a murderer. So we quickly came up with an idea. Someone went to a drugstore, bought stockings. I put the stocking over my head. I walked back into the interview. She looks at me and says, what are you doing? Rabbi Shmuley, what are you doing? I said, I'm not Rabbi Shmuley. I said, what are you doing? You're Shmuley. I said, no, I'm not. I said, who are you? I said, I'm Ed. And she said, you're really freaking me out. You got to take that thing off your head. I said, this is what Ed looks like. And this is the picture I always want you to have in your head. You know what Ed is? He is the voice of inadequacy. The voice that tells you you're never studying enough. You're not serious enough. You're not disciplined enough. You're not smart enough. You're not accomplished enough. You're not young enough. You're not thin enough. You're not athletic enough. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. And where did this voice come from? The essence of Judaism is a rejection of perfection. It is the man or the woman who takes pride in their daily struggles. It is the man or the woman who is inspired to fight on another day. It is the man and the woman who understands that perfect people are perfect bores. That perfect people are perfectly monolithic. They're unidimensional. They have no depth. They have no color. The man or the woman who struggles to raise good kids, and damn is that hard, to raise kids with morals and ethics. And you understand that it's going to be a struggle, so you don't make your kids always feel inadequate. Like, why is this so hard? It's hard because choosing to do the right thing is the battle of your life, and it proves that you give a damn. And if it came easy, then there would be there would be no way to prove that. Being a good person, extending yourself, not gossiping about people behind their back. This is all so difficult. Not reading garbage, not watching garbage, trying to develop your mind, your heart. This is all a struggle. And instead of complaining about it or feeling inadequate or getting depressed about it, you're supposed to embrace it. You're supposed to feel that every time you make a choice to do the right because it's right, that you've achieved moral greatness, even if you fail the very next minute. That is a purpose-lived life. That is a life that we can take pride in amidst our imperfections. I believe in imperfections. I believe in the humility that comes with imperfections. That's why I am a Jew. And by the way, it's true for Christians as well. Jesus is half human and half God. Why don't we hear more about the human side? You don't have to be Jewish to embrace struggle. Jesus had incredible struggles. He wrestled with the devil for 40 days in the desert. That was the whole idea of Lent, which we're in the middle of. But we rarely hear about that. We hear only about his divine character. We hear that Jesus willingly laid his life down in order to atone for the sins of mankind while the Romans brutalized him. No, I bet it was much harder than that. I bet he experienced real pain. Why don't we ever talk about that pain? As for the Jews, our entire existence has been one long struggle. Our name is Yisrael, he who wrestles with God, he who struggles with God. You know, I heard a rabbi speak about the Holocaust recently, because I went to Poland on January 27th for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. January 27th is the day that the Red Army liberated Auschwitz. So I had been to the death camp before, but I had never been there in the winter. You don't understand the Holocaust until you've been to Poland in winter. I've lived in cold climates. I live in New Jersey now. It's pretty cold outside here at Penn State. I have never experienced And I've been to Scandinavia. I've been north of the Arctic Circle in winter. For some reason, I have never experienced the kind of cold that I experienced in Poland this past January. The Israeli Knesset went to Auschwitz, and I was invited to accompany them, and I went with them. It was a very inspiring day. The Israeli flag was flying over the death camp. Both in Auschwitz I, which was more a labor camp, but also people were murdered, but especially at Birkenau, which was the death camp, where 1.5 million people were gassed to death. And so 64 members of the Knesset, 8 Israeli ministers, Polish ministers, Russian ministers were all there. And I walked in, I was freezing. I was wearing good, solid equipment, 8 or 9 layers, and I was chilled to the bone. And I went and saw the remnants of Crematoria 1, Crematoria 2, which were exploded a week before the Russians arrived. And I was so haunted by everything I was seeing, and so cold, that I didn't hear the instructions where they told us. We came in through the Arbet Machfrei gate, and then we walked under the arch where the train would go in. And then we were supposed to walk all the way out. But I heard them make an announcement, go back to where you started. So I and one other person, we went to the wrong place. So everyone was in the buses. In order to pick us up, they said, just wait there, we'll come and get you. But there was so much security, because the Israeli Knesset was in Poland, that it took them a half an hour just to traverse the back of the camp to the front. I'm sitting there, I'm waiting. It's winter, days end early, and the sun's going down, and the sun is going down, and the sun is going down. And I'm watching the sun go down. And I have to say the afternoon prayer of Mincha before the sun goes down. And now it's twilight, and I can't pray. And I can't pray. And I look at the desolation in front of me. And there's only one other human soul there. And I'm looking at the ash in the barracks, in the crematoria. And I'm saying, is God even here? Who am I going to pray to? God is not here. God couldn't have been here. And metaphorically, as the sun descended and the light was disappearing, it struck me that there was no light in this place. It was a place of the thickest darkness. And yet my conscience is saying, Shmuley, you have to pray. You have to pray. So I prayed the Mincha prayer begrudgingly. I did it out of a sense of duty and obligation because I'm an Orthodox Jew. Because I'm a rabbi with a beard and a yarmulke. But my heart and my soul were not in that prayer. What was really in my heart and my soul was defiance. God Almighty, do you deserve to be prayed to if there can be places like this? Do you deserve it? God, Master of heaven and earth, He who fills the infinite expanse of space, do you deserve to be prayed to when there are places like this? Have you earned the right to be worshipped in a place like this? And I sat there wrestling and battling with my soul, trying to find the divine spark within that felt at that moment like it was extinguished. Until it became pitch dark and the buses finally arrived to pick me up. And I came back to New Jersey after going to the Warsaw Ghetto for 3 days in a deep depression that I did not break out of for 3 weeks. I was so down those next 3 weeks that I even wrote an article about it, which you can look up, called The Winter of Our Discontent, and I talk about it. I could not shake that feeling of desolation and forlornness. But I finally had to. I had to struggle and wrestle, not to forgive God, because there was nothing for me to forgive, because I was not a victim of the Holocaust. It would be sanctimonious and judgmental of me to assume that I was someone there who could actually judge God. It was rather the feeling that I could have a relationship with God amidst those negative feelings. That my relationship with God was actually authentic and real. That just like we don't let God off the hook for Auschwitz, we don't forget to give God praise for the fact that I have 9 healthy children, thank God. Or that all of you have something to eat. Or that all of you have 2 legs and 10 fingers and 10 toes. And that's what the Talmud meant when it said that just as we bless God for the good, we bless Him for the bad as well. Not that you're supposed to say blessings on bad things, although we try to do that as well. It's rather that we try to have an authentic relationship with God that's based on struggle and not on perfection. When Abraham is told by God that the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah are so wicked and so evil that they will be destroyed, what does Abraham say? He lifts his fist to the heavens. He takes a cudgel to the celestial spheres and he says to God, you are the judge of the entire earth. You shall not practice justice. He rails and thunders against what he believes to be a divine miscarriage of justice. Does that make him an atheist? Does that make him an agnostic? Does that make him a lapsed Catholic or a non-observant Jew? No. That's what made him Jewish. He was prepared to wrestle with God. His relation with God was not perfect, but it was real, it was authentic, and that's why it brought about so much change in the lives of ordinary humans, because he inspired them for religion to be something real. And to the extent that religion is dying in our time, it's because it's dogmatic, because it doesn't touch our lives, because it's a collection of empty ritual that doesn't reach us where we truly are. That's why the churches are empty, and that's why the synagogues are empty. Because our relationship with God is always going to be one of struggle. We have Sean Penn, Moses, come back to that in a second. We have Sean Penn coming as our guest of honor. When I was a rabbi at Oxford, so some of our student presidents went on to positions of great national service. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey was the president of the L'Chaim Society. He's one of our honorees at our dinner this year, on May 18th. Israel's new ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, is one of our student presidents. But Sean Penn is one of our honorees because it's a long story, not for now, but he went to Bolivia and he rescued the life of an Orthodox Jew. He got it on. But more importantly, it's what he does in Haiti. I was in Haiti 4 days after the earthquake. And I brought my eldest daughter, who's now married, thank God, with me. You know what's worse than the sight of death? You know what's much worse than the sight of death? It wasn't going to the morgue and seeing 30 or 40 dead children breathe like they were asleep. It wasn't even going to the nursing college attached to the hospital, which collapsed on 180 nurses, killing them all. And they were still trapped in the rubble. And I am sorry to say this. Talk about things that you will never forget. 4 days after the earthquake, I saw scavenger dogs eating the remains of humans in front of my eyes. But that's not what haunted me. What still haunts me in my dreams about Haiti, and what is far worse than the sight of death, is the stench of death. The whole Port-au-Prince reeked of death. It was the most horrible smell I have ever encountered in my life, and I will never forget it. And I looked around and I also said, God, how could you allow these things? Rabbi Nelson and Sarah are the ones hosting me here tonight. They were sent by the Lubavitch Rebbe to be here on campus in Penn State, just like I was sent to Oxford in 1988. The Lubavitch Rebbe, when I was a student in Oxford, in Israel, as a rabbinical student in Jerusalem, I think it was 1984. So if you know anything about Israeli politics, the Shas party, a very religious party, started about 1984. And they immediately captured, I think, 16 seats or 10 seats. So they got a minister. The minister of the Interior, the first Orthodox Jewish minister of the Interior, his name was Yitzchak Peretz. And one day, while I was a student in Israel, a bus filled with children was crossing train tracks. And it was hit by a train. And 27 children were killed instantly. You have to understand, Israel's a small country. Now it has 6.5 million Jews. Then it had 5 million. 27 kids is the equivalent of, you have to multiply by 60, so that's by 30, sorry, 20. So that's the equivalent of, let's say, 1,000 children dying in one accident. The whole country was in mourning. Rabbi Yitzchak Peretz stood up at the rostrum of the Knesset, and he said that the reason these children died is that in Israel, people thrive on the Sabbath. They desecrate God's holy day. So God punished Israel. And that Shabbos, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who, as I said, sent Nassan and Sarah here, a man who opened more Jewish educational centers than anyone in world history, perhaps combined. He spoke that Shabbos afternoon. I wasn't there, but I read the transcript. And he said, a rabbi said, that innocent children died because people didn't keep the Sabbath. And then he slammed his fist on the table and he introduced two words that would become the expression by which he would be known for the rest of his life. For the first time he said, Ad Mosai. You know what my response to 27 dead children is? How long, O Lord? How long will you look at children dying and be passive and do nothing? The greatest rabbi in the world challenging God in front of 10,000 people, banging, Ad Mosai, how much longer? He wrestled with God. He battled God in front of everyone. We are not cosmic chaff who can't sometimes fight back. We value life because God commanded us to value life. On the last day, so this is an affirmation of our belief. The person who struggles, Yisrael, he wrestles. The person who's not perfect, who doesn't just pretend that it's all perfect, who doesn't sweep all these divine questions under the rug, he or she has a true relationship with God. And they have a real relationship with every other person as well, where the uncomfortable things are discussed in relationships and never swept under the rug. When I was a boy and I was in summer camp, I wanted to understand, why does God allow so much suffering? So they told me a story. It's a very famous story. The founder of the Hasidic movement 250 years ago, 300 years ago, was Rabbi Baal Shem Tov. And every Simchas Torah, the happiest day of the Jewish year, he had a custom. He would invite barren women into his office and he would bless them to have children. So one year, all these women were lined up and he gives each one a blessing except for one particular woman. He overlooks her. She comes back the next year, and again he doesn't bless her. The third year, everyone else gets a blessing except her. She lunges at his feet. She holds on to his feet. And she says, if you don't bless me, I will never leave your office. Baal Shem Tov tries to wrestle himself free from her grip, but he can't. He looks at her and he says, very well. In a year's time, you will be suckling a male child. And true to his word, she had a baby boy. A few months later, and she couldn't be happier. And the boy was the center of her life, the apple of her eye, her joy and her happiness. But after 2 years, the child contracted pneumonia, and he died very quickly. And she brought the lifeless body of the baby back to the Baal Shem Tov. And she lay him on his desk, and she said, you knew, didn't you? You knew he would die. Baal Shem Tov said, yes, I knew. She said, that's why you wouldn't bless me. Baal Shem Tov said, that's correct. And she said, I wish that you would not have given in, because the grief I now know in his loss is so much greater than before I even had him. And she cried so much that the Baal Shem Tov looked at me and he said, this one time, I will lift the veil that separates the hidden from the revealed worlds. And I will tell you the story of your son's soul. And he said to her, and this kind of applies to geopolitics right now, he said, do you remember that 50 years ago, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the Ukrainian Cossack, rampaged through the countryside, killing every Jew they found in every village. Before the Holocaust, this was the greatest slaughter of Jewish life in history. Khmelnytsky killed about 300,000 Jews in 2 years, 1648, 1649. There were no gas chambers. There were no Einsatzgruppen with automated mechanisms of death like machine guns. You had to kill every person with an axe or with a sword. So it wasn't easy. It was time-consuming and laborious. Very much like the genocide of Rwanda, whose 20th anniversary is April 7th. Baal Shem Tov said, well, there was a Cossack group and they came and they wiped out an entire Jewish village. But there was a Cossack who was childless, and he sees a baby crying. The baby and he spares his life, and no one's looking, and he adopts it. And for 2 years, this baby goes with his father, witnessing as a child rape, murder, sexual violence, genocide, mass murder. And at the end of 2 years, the Russian Tsar and the Polish king decide to join forces to defeat Khmelnytsky and the Ukrainians. and they restore peace to the countryside. And they come across a baby who's circumcised. They know he's Jewish. So they took the baby to the Jewish community, and they checked the baby was adopted. The baby went on to become a boy and a grown man who had a family of his own, led a righteous life. After 120 years, he dies, and his soul goes up to the heavenly tribunal, and he should go to heaven. He should go to the Garden of Eden. But the angels decide that his soul has been tainted and stained by all of the horrors the baby witnessed at such an impressionable age. So they decree that before he goes to the Garden of Eden, the baby has to go back down to earth. To be suckled by a Jewish mother in a righteous, holy environment for 2 years. And the Baal Shem Tov says to her, this was your child. And this story was told to me to explain to me why bad things happen to good people. They're not bad. We're just too stupid to know how good they really are. And I took this story with me wherever I went until I hit about 21 years old. And then I knew it was a beautiful story, but it explained precisely nothing. And I'll tell you why. Because when I was 8 years old, I had cavities because I ate too much junk food. And my mother took me to the dentist, and the dentist pulls out this giant needle, and he shoves it into my gum, and it hurt like hell, and I'm complaining. 40 years later, I went to the dentist. I still have cavities. And he pulls out this giant needle, and he shoves it into my gum. And I said to him, what are you doing? He said, you know what I'm doing? You've been here before. I'm putting the Novocaine into your gum, and I'm going to numb the tooth, and I'm going to try. I said, wait a second! They did this to me when I was 7 years old. I'm now 47 years old. In that time, they invented the internet. Men walked on the moon. We got landers and rovers on Mars. You haven't yet invented a painless method to numb a tooth and get rid of a cavity? What is this barbaric science you're practicing on me? You see, God can cleanse the soul of a baby without a mother mourning for the rest of her life. He's God. He can bring this all about through a painless means. They say that the Holocaust happened because that's what led to the state of Israel being born. Well, do most nations only get a country after 6 million people die? You mean it couldn't have just come about painlessly? It explains nothing. The only thing we're left with is our need to struggle, to embrace the struggle, to reject perfection, to reject feelings of inadequacy, to never feel like we're not good enough, and to take pride in what the Talmud says, that every person is like a grape and you only get the wine when you're squeezed, and every person is like an olive, you only get the oil when you're squeezed. So I'm going to conclude with this little story. As you heard in the introduction, so for a year I did Oprah's marriage. I was a marriage, parenting, and relationship expert on the Oprah and Friends Radio Network. So there were 7 of us. There was Maya Angelou, there was Dr. Oz, there was Oprah, there was Gail King. Each of us did a different subject. The way I met Oprah was through an episode of Shalom Nahum. There was a woman in Orlando named Carolyn. And 8 years ago, on Valentine's Day, she was in Orlando. She and her husband went out for a romantic dinner. And she was driving home. They were driving home in their Corvette. And the story's murky, but someone tried to drag race it anyway. The Corvette hit a lamppost. The Corvette is made of fiberglass. His head hit the steering wheel, and he bled to death in his wife's arms. She took the bloody dress and she put it under her bed. She put these black and white somber photos of him all over. And she has 2 daughters, and day and night she would show them videos of their father. And she would say things like, I'll never date again, I'll never marry again, because you'll never have anyone like your father. He's irreplaceable. This went on for 6 years. She could not overcome grief. So one of her friends wrote to our show through the website and said, this is someone who could use your help. The producers found it an intriguing story when grief becomes excessive. So we went down to Orlando and did a show. And after seeing her new life consumed by grief, I looked at her after spending 3 days with her and her daughters, and I said to her, on the final day of Moses' life, when the great prophet had led the Jews across the wilderness for 40 years, he sat them down and he gave them a very lengthy monologue, the highlight of which was this. He looked at them and said to them, I will now die, but you must choose life. And for the rest of your existence, you will have daily choices between life and death. And you must always choose life. In that daily confrontation, in that daily choice, you must always choose life. And I looked at her and I said, Carolyn, 6 years ago, death chose you. You had no choice in the matter. Death barged into your home, into your car, and it kidnapped your husband forever. You did not choose death, it chose you. But when he broke into your home, you asked him to stay. You invited him in as a member of the family. You gave him sanctuary and you made him feel comfortable and at home. When really, after he chose you, you had a responsibility to kick him out. So we took down the black and white photos. We put up beautiful color photos. We stopped the kids watching daily videos of their father, and we rather gave the kids 4 things that their father represented, his virtue. He loved the elderly, so they started visiting homes for the elderly. He loved his elderly grandparents. They did it in his name. He loved museums. Girls started to learn about art history. 4 things, virtuous actions they could do in his name as opposed to just watching somber videos of his death. Every day you have that same choice. You can choose between life and death. And the struggle is to always put life first. If you had a falling out with a friend, you can leave it dead. You can kiss that relationship goodbye and you can put your pride first, but just know that you're choosing death. If your relationship with your parents is not good enough, and you're not prepared to struggle to make it better because you think it's supposed to be perfect and it's not perfect, and you hate your parents for doing this and that, just know that you've chose the death of that relationship instead of confronting some of the pain in order to breathe new life into it, the way God breathed life into the corpse of Adam. When you choose to live for material possessions and your joy is going to come from wealth and just buying stuff to make you happy, just know it's never going to make you happy because you're choosing a life of death, dead objects that will give you pleasure and joy for maybe a week, maybe a month, and then you'll have to buy more and you'll become an addict, a shopaholic, just to sustain the addiction. 1 out of 4 American men is a porn addict, defined as spending an hour a day online looking at porn, especially husbands. Doesn't apply to students as much. You know what the French call the male orgasm? Le petit mort, the little death. These aren't sex addicts. This guy comes to me and says, you got to help me. I have a sex addiction. I'm a sex addict. I sleep with all these women and I can't connect with them. I said, you're not a sex addict. You're a death addict. You don't use women for sex. Sex would make you feel alive. Sex is where you feel exhilarated. Sex makes your skin tingle. It shoots you to the moon and back. You don't have sex. You're an orgasm addict. You use women just for climax. You want the nirvana and the numbness and the non-feeling that comes after sex. You're not choosing life. You're choosing death. Women are, and that's what pornography is. Pornography is about the male orgasm. It has nothing to do with women. It has nothing to do with sex. It's the abuse of women to feel nothing, to feel pain, the death of pain. It's just another drug. It's just another numbing agent. Our obligation is to choose life at all times. So, we choose life by feeling better about ourselves, by having a high opinion of ourselves, by ceasing to judge ourselves, by ceasing to judge the people around us, by purging ourselves of this death instinct that just looks at a mirror and sees something ugly, that looks at a career and sees something insignificant. You choose life by not having a career, but by having a calling. A career is all about you. It's too big a burden. You'll be carrying it on your shoulders forever. A calling is where you hear, where you're needed, where you're necessary, and where you always feel alive. Thank you very much.
So now we're going to look at some porn for about an hour.